I'm Carrie Mumford. I'm going to be the surprise moderator for this panel. So I thought we'd start by introducing ourselves. So let's start at the end with Sandra.
Okay. My name is Sandra Fitzpatrick. However, you notice there's another name on here. That's the name I write under, Lee F. Patrick, because my day job is investments, insurance, and taxes. The fantasy writer and whatnot is sort of, although in one of my books I do have an awesome stock market crash. It's even worse than the one we had, but you know, it was evil people doing it who get theirs. And yeah, I've been writing for a lot of years. You don't want to know the state of my hard drive, where maybe you go, oh, mine's like that too. There's a lot of stuff on there that's partly written, and there's a bunch of short stories. There's just a lot of stuff. So yeah, I'm trying to get things out into the world now. So that's me. So.
Okay, so I'm Monica Zwikstra. Don't worry about trying to pronounce the last name. Nobody can. New book. It's in the thank you. I don't know what to tell you, except that I started out with writing short stories before I wrote the book. And so I can talk more about why I did that as we go along. I'm from southern Alberta, and I've got cats, and they go with me everywhere. Okay? That's me.
Hi, my name is Jay Martin. I am the author of this book, Vodka and Apple Juice, which is also available very kindly in the store here, which is great. I am currently living in Edmonton, Alberta. As you can probably tell, I'm not originally from there. I am originally Australian, so it's a bit of a surprise to find myself in Edmonton, but that's another story. I did start off, before I wrote this book is about 3 years that I spent living in Poland, so I can actually pronounce Zwikstra, so although I just messed it up right then. I did start out as being freelance and writing short stories and articles for travel magazines, for local news outlets and things like that. And so I'm actually really glad to have gotten on this panel, because I did find it a really interesting transition from doing 800, 1,000 words to doing 100,000 words, which it turns out wasn't actually just like writing one article 100 times. It was a little more complicated. So I'm really excited to hear everyone else's stories about that transition, and to tell you a few of my stories as well.
I'm Carrie Mumford, and much like Monica and Jay, I got my start with writing short stories. I have published one collection of short stories, and I have another one coming out probably by the end of this year. So I found them to be a really good stepping stone to getting into writing novels, which I also wrote a novel, and that came out last year. So short stories, I still love writing them, and I still take breaks from novels to write them, and I love the form and how it's flexible, and it can, word count can go from 50 to 5,000 or more. So I'm excited to be here too. First, I thought we'd start out with, how have you used short stories as a stepping stone for your career? So I think, Jay, you covered a little bit about it, but do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So when I started actually thinking about writing a novel as opposed to just some short stories about my time in Poland, I went back to all of the stories that I'd written about Poland, and I had been writing for travel outlets and newspapers in Australia and in Poland about fun things you could do in Poland. So I had this collection of stories about going to Belarus, or going to this railway station in the middle of nowhere, or some person I met, and I really, I found that 800 to 1,000 words was kind of my sweet spot. You could take someone on a journey, you could introduce them to a character, you could have something interesting happen, and then finished. And so that was quite a nice kind of format for me. And then what I found was, when I tried to bash them all together into a book, it didn't actually work as neatly as it had in my mind. And I think there were lots of challenges and processes along the way, which I'm interested in other people's perspectives on. But one thing I sort of found was that there are stories in this book that really are essentially just fleshed out sort of short stories. There was 2 examples were one time I went to Ukraine, so I wrote a story about these things that happened when I went to the Ukraine to visit that, and then another time I wrote a story about when I went to Belarus and some interesting things that happened. And they're both good stories, and they're sort of quite interesting, I think, on their own. But what I had to decide in deciding whether or not to keep them in the book was whether or not they moved the whole book story along. And the book is a story about me discovering Poland, me discovering things about myself that I hadn't realized about Poland, and of course it has all these other characters in it as well. And so it was a real challenge for me to try to work out, how do I decide what to include and what to leave out, what really takes the story along, and what can I pull out of these short stories that actually moves the book along. And I think a piece of advice that really stuck with me when I was trying to do some research for this was, because I loved all these stories. I didn't want any of them to go. I wanted all of them to be in the book. But they said, I read a piece of advice which is, a book can't be like a drunken uncle who drags you along by the arm and says, "Come with me, I've got something really interesting to tell you." It's like, no, it's got to actually move it along. Just because you love it and you want to tell the story, it's not enough. And so I really actually took that to heart. I will say that there's one exception in this book, which is a story about, I meet 2 people who survived the war, 2 very old gentlemen who survived the war and who told me their story about what happened when they were 15 and fighting in the insurgency. And I'm not convinced entirely that it contributes to the story and that it takes it along, but I just had such respect for the people that told it to me and such respect for the people that the story that I heard, that I'm like, you know what? I'm the author and I get to choose, and it's going in there. So I don't know that you always make the right decision, but I think it's about being conscious about, how to use those stories in telling a bigger story about what you're trying to capture.
Great. How about you, Monica?
So the question is about
Oh.
short stories.
How have you used short stories as a stepping stone in your career?
As a stepping stone, yes, 'cause that is what the topic is, right?
Yeah, it says so right there.
Yeah, I did read that. Okay, so short stories for me, I was writing the book throughout all of this, and I was writing short stories because I would find I had difficulty with some aspect of writing. Okay, so maybe it was dialogue, okay? So I would write a short story with all dialogue so that I could work out my issues with how to write dialogue, okay? I used them as learning tools or practice tools for later on in my book, right? The fact that they ended up being published means that I did something right. Something, I'm not quite sure what that was, but that's okay. So as stepping stones towards writing a novel, that would be my take on that, is that I use them as practice stones, as practice pieces. And one of the odd things I found about myself is that I can write really, really short, or I can write really, really long, but I can't seem to write in the middle. I can't do the 6 or 7 or 8 or 10,000 word story. I can do flash fiction, I can do slightly larger than flash fiction, or I can write a novel, but I can't seem to write the thing in the middle. So that's my next step.
Well, the way my brain works, and sort of quote the process, I get an idea, and then I go, wow, this would make a great short story. And then the scope changes, and I tried to get into the Enigma Front monster anthology. These are the 2 stories I submitted. They're both about the same character, Ethan, who has a cougar living in his head. There's now a trilogy about Ethan and his cougar in his head. So trying to write short, I have, and with some of my short stories, they go, yeah, but where's the rest of it? And I said, that's a freaking novel. This is just a little, it's hard for me to do that. It's to go, no, it's got to be a very small thing. Whereas my brain goes, oh, it's this big. No, it's got to be this big. No, it's this big. It can also be handy. In one of my novels, I mention a character called, well, he's a serial killer who gets paid for it, that my hero they call him the steak knife mugger. Now, at 130,000 words, the novel was really a little too big. And I was like, no, I can't really take another 12,000 words to go into his story. So here it is. So these are up. I've got 3 of them now. They're up on Kobo and Amazon for Kindle. And I did the chapbooks for this event and some others. So you're able to take that small side story and tell it. Eventually, like Ethan and Monster's further adventures in short fiction are going to be compiled into a collection. Mm-hmm. So there's something else that you can sell. Mm-hmm. I mean, being able to sell your short stories, it's like, yes, income, very good thing. And they can actually, you can build these things up. So one of the other reasons I started doing some various short types of things was because when you're doing public readings, when you haul out the 150 or 250 page book, they go, no, you can't read the whole thing. You've got 5 minutes.
What?
For some of these, it's like, huh. So it gives you something to read, and it's also as you said, a learning tool. You're like, how can no, it's this big. No, it's going to be this big. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I also wrote some monologues back several years ago, and one was about a shipwreck and the priest going, please, it's wonderful, but can we get rescued? And also some poetry, for which I actually was nominated for the Aurora Award in Poetry last year. So I've got the little pin. And again, it's something, it builds your brand. Mm-hmm. And the more people who know your author name, the more people that might go, oh, that's pretty neat, and you go, oh yeah, I saw Monica at this thing, and maybe I'll check out her book on Amazon. And then they go, oh shit, I really want to buy this. Mm-hmm.
That's a really good.
Yeah, please do.
they're in the merchant's room.
Yeah.
That's a really good point about short stories. Is the way I use them early in my career, because by day I'm in marketing, so I'm always thinking about branding and getting your name out there. And I originally started with short stories because, like most of us have mentioned, they're shorter and contained, and you can finish one in a week if you're lucky, or a day if you're really lucky. And then it's a way to get your name out there, and you can start. It's easier to send out a short story than it is to query a whole book. Mm-hmm. So you can send it out, maybe 10 or 15 or 20 times until someone picks it up, and then that's a credit to your name, and then it just starts building from there. Like once you've been in one journal, it's easier to get in the next journal. And then what I did is, once I had, I think, 15 published stories, I collected those all into a chapbook, which, to Sandra's point, you can then market, or you take it with you when you're, building up your name in your career. So they can be really good for that.
Very, very nice.
Yeah. How do you find places to publish your short stories?
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I started getting really serious about publishing a few years ago, and so it was like, okay, I've got all this stuff on my hard drive. Where can I send it? So on Facebook, there's a group called Open Call. It is, people submit, that they'll put up a post that says, this anthology is now looking for submissions, or this magazine, or whatever, and it gives you a link to the relevant place. And that's all they do. It's very simple to join. Just look under Open Call, and you do have to answer the trick questions that prove that you're a person, not a spam bot. But otherwise, that works well. Rowlands is a website that has a lot of markets on there. RALANS. And there's another one called Submission Grinder, as in a meat grinder. They all have these lists of various things. For instance, how many people submitted short stories to the In Places Between contest? It happens every year. Most people don't know it exists, and they're sitting here, and they've been coming here for 9 years. And that's another thing is contests. And again, they're in things like the open call or submission grinder, but In Places Between is only for people who are attending this festival. So next year, and they're all over in the merchant room. I know, I'm doing plugs for all kinds of things.
Go for it.
Go right ahead.
I'm not in this year's. I was in last year's, but not this year.
How about you, Monica? How do you find places to publish?
Well, the places that she's mentioned, I've looked at as well. If you go online and just search for let's say you're a science fiction writer, for science fiction magazines, look those magazines up, then start looking at what, does your stuff fit those magazines, okay? It's no point in sending them a romance if they're science fiction.
Or hard
Okay?
SF.
So, yeah. So look at what they want, look at their submission stuff. If they're open, send your stories. But yeah, literally looking at where you would find your story, okay? So I would go to a bookstore and take a look at all the magazines in the bookstore and see what magazines are there. Look in the back cover, get their website, go look at it, okay? You'll find a lot of stuff on Facebook on the open call. Yes, there's a lot of that too. But over the last, number of years, we won't talk about how many.
The last few weeks.
Oh, okay, sure, I'll go with that. I have compiled on my computer. I have a great big long list of places to put your short stories, okay, and that purchase them for money, okay. Not everybody does money. Some of these places we don't pay you.
A lot of places.
A lot of places don't pay. And with the contest, you're going to go to that later, aren't you?
Yes.
So I'll leave that alone. I have a lot of places, and I just kind of go through my list now, okay? And just kind of send it. Nope, send it again. Nope, send it again. And just keep sending it. And that's what you end up having to do, is just keep sending it. And eventually, the right place, it fits the right place. And after a while, you start to get a feel. I kind of have a feel for what Polar Borealis likes. Okay, that's an online magazine. He doesn't pay a lot, but he does pay, and that's all that really matters to me. And he has a market, and so I kind of have a feel for what he wants. So now I know I can put more stories there, right? Because I know that's what he's going to like, and he's going to accept that. So that's you get into that, right? Yeah.
Sorry, what was the name again?
Polar Borealis.
As in polar circle, Polar,
Yeah.
Borealis.
Yeah,
he-
thank you.
Actually, that's where the poem that I got the Aurora nomination was published.
Yeah.
Because he went, hey, this is pretty neat. I don't understand it, but can you explain this to me? Graham's a dear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, what I was going to comment on was just the role of, existing social media. So where I really started was just writing Facebook posts for friends and for family. And, obviously that's not going to go anywhere initially, but it's a way to require you to have the discipline and start to do the practice and the skills that you need to do to write a short story, and you're unencumbered by the market or what you think the person's going to buy or what you think the magazine's readers want. They're just things that you want to say. And at the end of the day, most of the short stories and most of the writing that we do isn't published anywhere. It's part of the process, it's part of the practice. And that's where I sort of started, was to just kind of write things that I wanted to write. write. And people then responded and said that they liked to read them, which gave me a bit of encouragement. But it was really just a practice point. And then in terms of moving into the first paid job I got from that gave me a lot of material that I could then start to try to sell. And I was living in Poland at the time, and there was a magazine there that was kind of like a what's on in Poland, the sort of there's things that were happening in the city. And I thought, one of the things I really seem to enjoy writing is all the exploits of the wives behind the scenes and what was happening. And so I wrote to them with a pitch saying, I'd like to do a monthly column, and I could write about the wives and what they get up to. And they just wrote back and said, yeah, we love it. Great, come, let's have coffee. And that was where it sort of started. And then I think from there, it's partly talent and partly getting the right audience, but I think it's also partly being reliable. I think that's really important. Like if you write the best things in the world, but they're, late, it's not going to do you any favors with publishers. They're looking for people who are reliable, who'll commit, do what they've said they're committed to. And if you're going to, consistently produce something every month that people, it's good enough and people like, then, that'll get you a long way too. Just to being reasonable and easy to work with actually takes you a long way in the industry, I think.
You gave me another idea. So for when I submit short stories, I'm a bit obsessive, I guess. So I keep a spreadsheet, which is very not writerly, but I keep a spreadsheet of all my stories, and then I track where I submit, because one thing I've learned that it sounds like you ladies have learned as well is that it's pretty unlikely that you're going to get accepted at the first place you send your story to. So I use a website called Duotrope, Duotrope, and it's a paid subscription, but I think it's pretty affordable. And it's an amazing resource. It's like a database of journals. And so you can filter by genre, paying, non-paying, method of submission, like whether it's electronic, or a submission manager, like Submittable. And then you can track your submissions. And the great thing about Duotrope is it will tell you how competitive each journal is. So they'll give you a % chance of acceptance. They'll also tell you like an estimated turnaround time, so like how long you might have to wait to get a response for average based on reported submissions. And then I use that in my spreadsheet, and so I just have a rolling system where I'll send one out to someone who looks like they might be a good fit, wait to get accepted or rejected, and then send it out again. And I find that like just dusting myself off after each rejection and putting it out again and again. And some stories it takes 15 times before I get accepted. Others it takes 1 or 2. But just the perseverance is a big factor, I think, in actually selling short stories, because everyone's so individual. Every journal is different. Every journal has a different editor. Maybe the editor's in a bad mood that day. You never know why you get rejected. But yeah, I think perseverance is a big point there. Perseverance and being organized, because once you have a couple short stories going, you can forget where they are and who you sent them to, which is actually a good segue into contests, because one strategy I've used is if I submit to a contest, I don't submit elsewhere, because if you get accepted in the meantime, you have to withdraw from the contest, and usually you've paid for submitting to the contest, which is a big difference between just submitting to a general journal. Most journals, reputable journals, will not charge you for submission. Although I have seen this changing. I've noticed now a lot of American journals are asking for reading fees, which used to be like a big no-no to pay that. But often now they're saying by donation or a $5 fee or something, even at reputable journals. So something to watch out for. But contests, you almost always have to pay to enter. But the payoff is bigger. What do you have to say about contests, Jay?
I don't have much experience with short story contests, but I did, my path to publication was through a contest, so it was actually for local Western Australian authors, unpublished manuscripts from unpublished authors, and, I'd entered, quite a few of these. In fact, I'd entered that prize, with another manuscript as well, and I thought, I'm not going to win. Here's my $100, here's my manuscript, I'm just waiting for the rejection. As you say, it's a common experience. And then, but I suppose someone's got to win them, right? So these contests happen, someone wins them. I kept thinking to myself as I'm trying to grind through the last 50,000 words of this novel, this novel's never going to see the light of day. No one's ever going to read this. And I thought, well, not if I don't finish it, they won't. So it's like the first step to winning a contest is writing something and then entering it. And, everyone who won did those two things. So,
yeah. I'm going to be a bit of the naysayer. I don't like any contest where I have to pay to enter it. That's a personal thing for me. I just don't think that's right. So I like contests, but if I have to pay to enter it, I probably am not going to.
I agree with you.
Well, okay.
I don't enter contests where there's a reading fee, and if there was a reading fee for a particular market, I'd go no. Money flows to the author.
Yeah.
This is rule one.
This is a good point, because it's hotly debated, as like we're
Well,
almost
it's again,
debating it right
how
now.
how are they funding the contest?
Yeah.
I mean, the In Places Between is funded by donations and sale of books, and at one point, IFWA, the Imaginative Fiction Writers Association, was you didn't quite sell enough books here, we're buying everything. But that has never charged for anyone to enter.
Yeah.
A lot of literary journals and such, it is very common in that world to pay to be published.
Yeah.
Us genre/commercial, whatever you want to call it, writers go, nope. But they're very confused that we will not pay to be published. It's something totally foreign to the literary community. But it is very uncommon in genre.
That's a really good
commercial
point.
fiction.
Yeah.
On the literary side, I've edited for a literary journal, and there's just no money. Like there's, often they don't have subscriptions if they're small and starting up. And so they do contests maybe once a year just to get enough money to pay their editors and other people. So if it's a reputable journal and literary probably, then it's not that they're stealing your money often, it's that they just do the contest as kind of a funding drive. There's also journals, I think Alberta Views does this. When you enter their annual contest, you get a subscription. So maybe you're paying for the subscription. Who knows where your money's really going?
Yeah.
But the payoff with contests can be big, right? Like if you win a contest, your name might show up in a lot more places.
Well, like
than
the
just getting in a
CBC short
normal-
story contest.
Oh, yeah, that's
I
a
mean,
great
your name's
example.
going to be all over the CBC.
You're going to be on the radio.
But you're going to pay for that submission.
Yeah.
That's how it works. But
Yeah.
if you place even, that's a huge brand boost. And depending on what you want to, what your marketing plan is, that may be something that you go, I want to, I'm going to pay the fee and
And they're not usually high fees,
No.
but still, yeah.
yeah.
That's actually, you raised a good point about marketing plan. Like you can submit.
Having a plan?
Yeah, having a plan. You can submit strategically. Like I know with certain stories I think they're better perhaps than other stories and maybe appropriate for a wider audience. So I'll make a strategy for submitting that story, and I'll start with someone who seems more unattainable, like the CBC. Something that I know would be a big win, and I'll start there. And if I don't get picked up there, I'll go down to the next tier, kind of for what I'm looking for in my career at that time, whether it's finding new readers, or it's earning a little bit of money, or it's getting in a bigger name journal, like say Joyland or something. That's a big literary online journal. Or if I want to be in paper, not only print, in print, not only online. For a while I was working really hard to get in print journals because sometimes they have a different cachet to them. Or I think there's actually some associations where you couldn't be a member unless you'd been in print. So getting in print in a journal was a way to do that without publishing a novel. So you can develop a strategy for submitting your short stories too.
Do you want to ask for some?
Yeah, let's have
questions?
some. Do you guys have any questions? Nobody?
Oh, no, you
Thanks.
Thanks.
So, did you guys talk about Writers Weekly yet?
No?
Okay, so Writers Weekly, they run a contest quarterly, and I will tell you that it's legit because I won it. And it's $5, but it's a prompt that you receive Saturday morning, and you have to have it in the next day. So it's a really good way to exercise your brain. It's a good way to, even if you don't win, you could get an honorable mention. She does many honorable mentions. And it also led, then afterwards, it led to freelance work, so I freelance for them as well. So it's a good one. So it's called writersweekly.com.
Thanks
Great.
for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, you said you have to submit within 1 week?
No, one day. It's a prompt, and yeah, you have to write a story right then and there. But even if you don't win, you've got the bones of a story.
Yeah.
You know?
What stories do they give you the subject in of what we have to write about?
They give you a prompt, like 2 or 3 sentences, and then a word count. Yeah, and a word count, and top prize is like $300 US.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a question over here?
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you submit, like, how polished are your stories?
Oh.
Or like, do you get some editing help beforehand?
Well, that's a good question.
As polished as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not going to take a lot of time to do for short stories or for magazines and that kind of thing. They're not going to spend a lot of time polishing it for you. Okay, they pretty much expect it to be ready to go.
Yeah, it actually relates to something I was thinking of, which is in a short story, every word counts. So every single word has to be word perfect before it's going to go out. If you're serious about it.
Yeah.
It's a good point, though. I think you had a second question, too, about the editing, which I'll address in a sec. But actually, my first story that I had published, I thought it was perfect. And the editor at the journal came back to me with changes, which I think is pretty unusual. But that's how I ended up getting my first story published. But I did think it was perfect.
Some magazines or anthologies will give you feedback. One magazine had, I think there were 4 or 5 different colors of, this was back when everything was, you mailed them, not emailed, just mail. You know, remember we used to do letters, snail mail? And depending on their response, they had like, I think there were 5 different sort of canned, you know, from, this is kind of good, but it needs work, to do not darken our doorsteps again.
Ever.
And you know, sometimes the editor might actually handwrite some things on the back and go, well, here's the things. And other times they had a checklist on the front, and they tick off the things that you'd done wrong. And that was the feedback you got. Some do feedback, some don't.
I'm not finding too many giving feedback anymore.
No.
Not right for us.
Yeah, not right.
Yeah.
That's so annoying when they go, this is a wonderful story, but it doesn't
not
fit.
right for us.
And it's like,
I think part 2 of your question was, do you hire editors?
Yeah, or what kind of editing
Yeah,
requires?
I do, but I'm also a former editor, so I'm addicted to editors, but not for every story, only for some. Like usually when I'm struggling, I have a few choice editors I'll share with and say like, hey, what am I missing? But do you hire editors for your short stories?
I don't, but then I'm part of a writers group where I can nail somebody over there and say, would you help me with this? And she'll come over and she'll fix my grammar for me. The comma goes here, Monica not there.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I don't go out and find an editor for the short stories, no. But I do have friends that know the stuff and will help me, so.
yeah. Having a good critique group can be really handy for that, especially when you're just doing the short stories. But yeah, I've gotten some critiques that are totally awesome and fixed all the problems, and others were like, did you actually read the story I handed you?
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, you're focused on the entirely wrong thing that I had in the notes to the reader.
And that's when you find somebody else.
That's when you go, okay, you're a nice person, but no, you're not going to critique my stuff ever
Next
again
person.
because it's worthless.
Find somebody
You know,
that works,
it's
that
been
understands your head.
Yeah, it's, you know, if they're going, this is the problem, and you're like, no, you misread that. My thing was, it's not on Earth. So, no, it's not going to be like Earth.
So, from what Monica was saying, it's not really necessarily a good plan to try and take a novel idea and sort of work through it in the form of short stories. Or it could be done, but you might want to, you know, mix it up a bit so that it's not consistently the same character, and maybe do different characters as a feature in each short story, and then maybe pull it all together at some point.
Well, chapters and short stories are really different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe Jay, do you want to address that one since your story is?
I think you can give people hints of things in a short story. You can't. I mean, the thing that I found most difficult about turning a series of short stories into a novel was that in a short story you can't really deal with things like character arcs. It's very difficult to have a number of characters change their kind of perspectives, and this was one of the most difficult things I found in actually trying to turn it into a novel. I had a very clear view of what my characters, sort of individual characters, change was going to be, but then there were all these other characters that sort of have to turn up in a book, and I didn't really know why they were there sometimes. But in a short story you can get away with it because, well, you know, you went to the Ukraine, it was interesting, and this person went with you, and you really don't have to explain why they went or why they had 3 days off or, you know, what you were doing there. It's enough to say, oh, I had this friend and we went and we did this thing. But I think it's, you know, it's very difficult to kind of deal with that kind of, you know, that kind of change in the short story. But I actually wanted to share like one of my favorite short stories. It's a total of 7 words, but just shows you how you can actually change things in a very short space of time, or change something in your reader in a very short space of time. And I'm sorry, I can't give an attribution. It's just something I read a long time ago. For sale, one baby's crib, never used.
Yeah.
That's a riff off of Hemingway.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Baby
I didn't even
shoes
know
for
that.
sale,
But yeah,
never used,
exactly
yeah.
right. And I just think you can do it. You can you know, really change someone's perspective and turn something around quite quickly. But I still think it's very difficult to really explain things like motivation, like you know, change, like character changes, like personality changes, and things like that. So that was some of the challenges I had with the difference between the two genres.
But if
Okay.
you're, oh, sorry.
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say specifically if you're trying, like if you want to break a novel into short pieces to share, I see people do that, especially on sites like Wattpad, where you can kind of serialize a novel and you release a bit each week, or you can do it on a blog. You don't have to.
What's that called?
Wattpad, Wattpad. Super popular site, and they're a Canadian company, or they were. Yeah, so you could serialize a novel. You don't have to necessarily make it into short stories. Sometimes you can get a novel excerpt accepted at a journal, but it's pretty tough because it's really hard to have, you know, a part of a novel stand on its own without that bigger character arc, like you said.
Yeah. Short stories are, in their nature, short. They're not a novel. A novel carries from the beginning to the end an arc, which you can't get any. You can't take 1 or 2 chapters and make that a short story, because it's. I'm trying to define how to write a novel now. Short stories by their nature are tend to be on the short side and tend to be about a moment in time, or a specific event, or a very specific location, or something. They tend to have a singular spot, and they don't range out very much. At least that's the way I see it. Novels cover the whole world, okay? Whereas short stories are about this event, this person, this period of time, these things happened, and that changed that person. Okay? Now, you can have a whole bunch of those and make a whole bunch of short stories and put them into an anthology, and that's what I will hope to do someday. But a short story is that point in time, that event, that thing that happens, and the shift that happens, for me.
Yeah, and a short story is mainly about one person.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, this one I had, the original short story for this was just from the serial killer's point of view.
One person, yeah.
Anyway, we're
This-
getting
this-
short
Do you
on
guys have
time.
some more
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah, I'm curious, with the changes in the last several years between success of print versus digital publications, I'm sort of interested in the overall health. I know very little about the short story market, what's available, what's out there. I've entered a few things in some university journals and stuff. But can you give an overview of sort of where things are at for the short story market? And as a writer, what you can expect to find, what's going on out there? I really don't know what the snapshot is of short story submission.
I could do literary, but-
The submission areas that we talked about earlier, that's your best bet to have a look at what they are.
Your experience over the last 10 years, like what?
It's
what
gone
do you
more
see?
digital.
Is it growing? Is it, like,
The,
is
the,
there more
the digital market is growing. The digital market is growing. The online magazine thing is growing.
The print is getting less.
Less, yes.
Yeah, you know,
Is it, but I mean, overall, is there more opportunity there?
There's actually a lot, I mean, I probably have 75 to 100, a list of 75 to 100 different
You want
markets.
to share with us all?
Well, I wish I had it written out for you.
You can sell for
I could sell that, right? But,
It's in your newsletter. You can-
I could do that. Maybe what I'll do is I'll pull some of that up and put it on my website. How's that sound?
great.
That might be something I could do. Okay, so that's actually a good idea. But yeah, I mean, and that's built. I built that over time. Okay, as I found different places, and I put them on my list, and you see how many cents a word they pay, and you know how many they like science fiction. This one likes fantasy. This one likes true story stuff. The market is huge, really. There really isn't.
Yeah. And even, you know,
at
at the
least
top
I
of,
think it is.
oh, I was going to say at the top of your social media now, it's like it warns you, 3-minute read. You know, you're going to have to commit 3 minutes to this.
they're
I mean,
short.
you know, if people want that short, you know, something 30 seconds, you know, while they're waiting in a line.
What's the one? I want to call it. It's a flash fiction place, and I think it's actually called flash fiction. I'm not
Well,
sure.
there's the Arcanist, Arcanist.
this is
It's a one-page
Yeah.
email that you get every Friday.
Oh, I'll have to find the name of it, but and put it on my website. But
Yeah, daily science fiction
Daily
is
science
another
fiction.
one.
Thank you. That's one of them. And they're short stories. They're short.
Very short.
They're lunch hour reads. Okay, and they'll pay you.
We've,
Probably got one question now.
yeah, we have 2 minutes left, so we can do one more question.
I had heard that, and I don't know if you know anything about this, that Amazon, you can publish short stories on Amazon.
I think they canceled it. They used
Yep.
to have Amazon
Yep,
singles.
you can do it.
Where do you
I mean, you
go?
can do
Because I
it.
haven't even looked to read some, and I've looked up short stories and I
Well,
don't come up with
They have
They-
it in a
won't
category.
be listed as short stories.
Oh, it
You
can
just-
be.
It-
They
it
have
may
a
not
short
be,
story
but,
category.
Like, do you have to specifically know the story? Like,
I think so.
Or the
There-
author or something.
You can
yeah.
search by category on Amazon, so there's a category for short story collections. But individual short stories, there's no
I just wanted to
category.
read some choices.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Short story
called in
collections.
Short stories, and
Yeah.
I got like two that were part of an anthology.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I'm looking, where I need
The
to go.
category.
Yeah, but it is possible to publish them, but I'm not sure where,
How you look it up.
yeah,
Yeah.
people just,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a category for them.
yeah. Anyway, we
And I
need
think that's
to,
fairly new.
We need to bustle out.
I
Yeah.
think we're getting the wrap up. Thank
No,
you so much for
thank
coming. We
you.
really appreciate it. Thank you.